Hey folks, welcome back. I'm sitting down on the job today, not for too long, for just a little while anyways. I'm sitting inside my sawmill shack, and this is what I just got done building, or at least mostly done building recently. Check out that playlist to see it. What I'm going to talk about today is right behind me, and I'm not talking about the blower here. I'm talking about my Woodland Mills HM130. I have had that thing for nearly 3 years, and I've put on a lot of miles on it, including building this sawmill shack. I saw a question recently by one of you guys and I wanted to address it. One of you guys out there in the comments had asked me if I had to do it all over again, whether I would buy that HM130 again or whether I would go into an HM126 with slightly different specs. The reason you guys asked that was you mentioned how my trees are not overly big, some bigger, some smaller, but not overly big and definitely not up to the full capacity of that thing there behind me. So I'm going to answer that here today, and I'm going to give you a breakdown on the reasons why I bought that as opposed to the HM126 and give you guys a little comparison as to what's out there today. Anyways, I'm glad all you guys are here, and let's go. So a thing that Woodland Mills has done that I really like, and you guys probably will like as well, is how they put their technical specifications for each model of sawmill clearly on their website. When you're out shopping, there's nothing worse than having to dig through all kinds of information to find the nuts and bolts, the stuff that you really want to know about. What I'm going to talk about right now is actually from their website, and these are the technical specifications, or the tech specs, for the HM130max and the HM126. Now, if it comes down to the option between one or the other, I am of that belief that bigger is always going to be better in most cases. I never want to have a situation where I have a log made available to me, whether it's from my property or someone gives it to me, and I can't mill it because I chose a mill that maybe is a touch too small. Mind you, you have to talk about what you're going to be logging and whether you're going to be logging those big logs ever or whether you're not. If you're never going to mill anything big, then yes, get the size that's appropriate. Maybe 126 would be appropriate, maybe an HM122 is appropriate. For me, however, there are the odd times where I want to mill something just a little bit bigger, and hence why I went with the HM130. Regardless, let's talk more about the specs and then we'll get back to why I chose this one. The HM130 Max, the price $46.99, $4,699 Canadian, versus the HM126 for the same engine. The HM126 14 horse engine is $3,899. We're talking an $800 difference there from the HM126 to the HM130 Max with the same 14 horsepower Kohler engine. But keep in mind, the HM130 Max has an electric start. Is that going to be worth $800 to you? Maybe. Is it going to be worth it to you if you get a wider mill, bigger capacities? Maybe. Getting back to the HM126. The two options, as I mentioned, one is a 14 horsepower engine. The second option is a 9.5 horsepower engine. Both options are manual or pull start. The smaller engine, 9.5 horsepower Kohler, $36.99. The larger 14 horse Kohler manual start, $38.99. HM130 Max track width 37 inches compared to 30.5 inches with the HM126. Looking down at log clamps, the HM130 Max has two quick lock log clamps, and the single log clamp comes with the HM126. Moving over to some additional tech specs. If we have a look here at the adjustable blade guide, it comes on the HM130 Max standard, whereas if you get it with the 14 horsepower engine on the HM126, it still comes standard but becomes optional with the smaller 9.5 horsepower engine on the HM126. Blade size is obviously going to be different here. Blade size on the HM130 Max, quite a bit bigger. The overall length, 158 inches, same width at 1.25 inch. If we're looking at the HM126, 144 inches in length and the same 1.25 inch blade width. Looking down here a little bit up at the lubrication tank, HM130 Max has a larger lubrication tank, 13 liters or 3.4 gallons, and we're looking at the HM126, 10 liters, 2.6 gallons. Where some other differences come in, and these are maybe not that important to you, comes down to the product weight and ultimately the shipping weight. Higher product weight means the product's bigger. HM130 Max, 921 pounds. As comparison, we're in the 700 to 800 range, 794 pounds of the larger HM126 and the 774 pounds of the 9.5 horsepower HM126. All right, so those are pretty much the only differences between the larger 130 max and the 126. Aside from that, all the other specs are identical. So what it ultimately comes down to is what you're going to be milling and whether your log choice is going to make a big enough impact on your sawmill choice. You guys have probably heard the old saying, you only buy things once. Well, yeah, mostly, as long as it's a good quality product. I think this is a good quality product, but I don't want to have to buy things more than once if I don't have to. When I bought this, I had the intentions of buying it and servicing it and extending its life as long as possible. I knew that if I bought something that I still doubted its size capabilities, I might regret it and ultimately lose money by having to sell it to buy the bigger one down the road. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to scrounge, I'm going to grab my pennies and I'm going to count them up, and we're going to buy the biggest possible. If I use it, great. If I don't need it, well, it's still available. I will forget about the price eventually. As you guys can see, several years later, I couldn't even tell you what I paid for this. Did it put me in the poorhouse at the time? Yeah. Did I get over it? Yeah, I got over it. It took some time, maybe a little bit longer than if I bought the 126 or maybe even the HM122. But I got over it, I forgot, and I'm happy that I have the capability in the event that I need it. There's another thing that's often overlooked by people when they're looking at the size of sawmill they're going to buy, and that's the things that tend to stick out and jab off the branches. There's nothing more frustrating than when I do a poor limb job out in the bush. I get the log over to the sawmill and I realize that I have to stop and trim the limbs again so that I can mill the thing. You know what's great about a big sawmill, a wide opening? If you get a little nubbin or a little, I don't know, a little length of the branch and it's still on there, you can just cut it with the sawmill and it doesn't really matter. If you have a smaller sawmill and you're sort of scrounging for every inch of width of that log you can get, you're going to have to clean those limbs off nice and tight every single time. I should be doing that, but the reality is, and many of you guys will agree with me, that doesn't always happen, especially on the underside of the log when it's dug down in the snow and you don't see it. By the time you get it over to the mill and you throw it up there, you notice you got a whole row of limbs you still got to take off. Big mill, you don't really have to worry about it. Small mill, you might have to. I was talking a moment ago about little nubbins sticking off the side of logs and things of that nature and why having a wider opening for a bigger sawmill is easier. Well, the same goes for not having straight logs. Not every log you're going to cut down or tree you're going to make into a log will be perfectly straight, and to be honest, oh, these are half decent. I can't say that, but there are the odd time I get trees and they're crooked as anything. That crook in those trees, well, that just took that opening width on your sawmill and dropped it down a bit, because if you're cutting, obviously the sawmill doesn't shift left or right, so you got to have a wide sawmill if you got a big crook in your board. Otherwise, you're going to have to cut out the crook before you mill it. At one point in time, the larger sawmill had the larger engine, but now that the HM130max as well as the HM126 both have the 14 horsepower Kohler engine, power is no longer a deciding factor, at least for me, in buying a larger mill. If I want power, and to be honest with you, I could definitely not see a reason to have more power, but if I did want it, I could get that same power in the HM126, so that becomes a null and void point. With that thought of power in mind, if you don't want to be pull starting your engine, it's important to note that to get an electric start on the 14 horsepower Kohler, you got to bump up to the HM130max. So guys, when the end of the day comes around and you guys are still in that race trying to figure out who's coming out on top, whether it's an HM130max or an HM126, I can do nothing more than say good luck. I went through that same process a few years prior. What I ended up choosing was the HM130. This turned out to be the best option for me, and before you say, yeah, okay, well, you could have saved a few bucks because you don't mill anything big, here's the real reason why I chose the HM130. You cannot mill a big log with a small sawmill. You can, however, mill a small log with a big sawmill. That in the back of my mind helps me sleep easy at night and ultimately led me to this purchase. I'm very happy with it, but to be honest with you, as long as you guys are out making dust with whatever sawmill you have, life is going to be good. So guys, I just covered a lot of points there. To be honest with you, it's going to vary depending on your circumstance. You guys will be the best judge of what is for you. Ultimately, what it comes down to is getting out there, taking some nice trees, making some logs, and making beautiful lumber and projects from them. if you're out there, you're happy, you're making sawdust, and that's what it's all about. Guys, you all take care. If you haven't done so already, check out the playlist for this build. Be sure to subscribe as well. That would be greatly appreciated. And for everyone out there, come on back next time, and I'll see you then.